see. Oh, here we go. I have one of these somewhere upstairs, I think. Let's see. What I want to show you is the hurt that we felt was not from bad people. It's the good people who stood by and watched everything happen and did nothing, said nothing. It's like Mrs. Bettesworth, who sicked her dog at me every day as I walked to and from school. That didn't hurt me as much as the fact that my classmates wouldn't play with me or talk to me. No one would sit in the same pew at the church when I'd walk there every Sunday just to be around people, because I was so lonely and socially isolated. Ni is 2, sang is 3. It's a pretty simple kanji, but I can't seem to... Ichi stands for first. That'd be the first generation of immigrants like my parents. They're called the Issei. Sei is birth, so first birth. Nisei is second birth, second generation, but actually first generation in the United States. The whole history of World War II has to be told by the Nisei. The Issei didn't talk about it, and the Nisei didn't talk about it for 30 years. And it was the Sansei who said, "What? Mom, Dad, you were locked up for 3 years and never told us?" So it happened in the 40s. Nobody knew anything about it hardly through the 50s and even 60s. And I'm the last of the Nisei generation. When I'm gone, the stories are gonna, first-person stories are gone. Asians in general were discriminated against and were referred to as the Yellow Peril, because they were coming in droves from Asia, the Chinese first and then the Japanese, and they helped actually lay the transcontinental railroad. The Americans said, "They're taking our job." This is the same old story. "They're taking our jobs." They were thrifty and they worked hard, and they didn't hire people. They had their whole families work, so they prospered financially. And we don't want them taking our properties and making so much money. And when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, that gave the government and the military all more reason to discriminate against Asians in general. But it was in the great wisdom of the U.S. Army said, "We've got to get rid of these people. The sabotage of these Japanese on the West Coast, they're a threat, so we've got to lock them up." And somebody said, "Well, but they haven't done anything." Well, that's all the more reason we need to lock them up so they don't do anything.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our West Coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move.
We didn't know where we were going. We just had to report at the train station. We all got on the train. I was in the 4th grade, 9 years old, I think. I thought, "Oh, goody, my first train ride." But when we got on the train, we had to pull the blinds and not look out. And we didn't know where we were going, how long it would take. And I was crushed that none of my 4th grade classmates had come to say goodbye. I always puzzled about that, and I said, well, they couldn't come to say goodbye. It was a school day. And then I found out later they didn't even know I was leaving, because the fact that we're being moved was kept kind of like a dark secret.
Evacuation. More than 100,000 men, women, and children, all of Japanese ancestry, removed from their homes in the Pacific Coast states to wartime communities established in out-of-the-way places.
There were 10 relocation centers, the more permanent camps that were prepared for us. And I was first sent to the one in Tule Lake, California, Northern California. And when the so-called loyalty oaths were brought forth, we were moved to Heart Mountain, Wyoming.
Meanwhile, in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and elsewhere, quarters were being built where they would have an opportunity to work and more space in which to live. When word came that these new homes were ready, the final movement began.
Each building was a tar paper barrack, like Army barracks you've probably seen pictures of. There was no insulation, there was no indoor walling, so the only shelves we had were like the 2x4s that were sticking out. I remember putting my little toy things on there to decorate around the room. We moved to Tule Lake, there were 6 of us, and we got 2 rooms adjoining with 3 beds in each room. And nothing much more because the toilet and shower facilities were in a public area for the whole block. And each block had maybe 12 barracks. Each barrack housed 4 or 5 families, 25, 30 families taking showers in a public shower room, and toilets side by side, 6 this way, 6 this way, and no partitions. So sometimes you go to the bathroom and you'd be sitting there trying not to look at the other 6 or 8 people who are also sitting there. In the summer, there were these terrible dust storms that just would come sideways and hit your legs. It felt like pins and needles. And in the winter, it was the snow blizzards that hit you. I had to run across those fire breaks to school. And in those days, girls were not allowed to wear hats. We always wore dresses, skirts, so our legs were exposed. And I'd go and I'd crouch down and put my skirt down over my legs, and then I'd count to 5, and then I'd get up and run some more. In Tule Lake, mercifully, the fence was a long way off. If you strained your eyes, you could see it over there. But they put the fence away from the barracks somewhat. And it had only 2 or 3 barbed wire, like for a cow fence. And it did have electrification on the top. I could crawl under or through the barbed wire to get out the fence if I wanted to. Well, if I did get out in Tule Lake, I'd be faced with desert-like fields, nothing.
Lands that had never been occupied or farmed were chosen for most of the relocation centers. About half of the evacuated people were farm folk, skilled producers of vegetables, fruits, and other crops. They had made desert lands productive before, and around the relocation centers they could and did do it again.
Tule Lake had one of the largest victory gardens, and we provided all the fresh vegetables that we consumed, and the excess was sent out to feed the rest of you. Everybody who had an occupation were recruited or volunteered to do that kind of work. So doctors and dentists were in the clinic, and the nurses. The only occupation that was not allowed to be continued, guess, teachers. So all our teachers were Caucasian. Of course, while we were living there in Tule Lake, since we were locked up, we had no idea of the Modoc Wars. If we had been able to hike outside the fence, we could have seen the petroglyphs on the other side of Castle Rock and the remnants of the history of that area. But we didn't know they were even there.
The Modocs had lived there for, well, they put it at 10,000 years. You know, we don't really know exactly, but it had been home for a long, long, long time. And the Modoc War, when it came along, was all over land. Settlers came in, and when they came in, they wanted to own it. And that's kind of the basis of what the Modoc War was all about. I think the thing that most people do not know is why it started. There were two men. One was a high official in state government, and the other one was an official with the government. They rigged a scheme whereby they convinced the settlers living there that the Modocs were causing them problems. So in turn, you know, those settlers that were living there, they complained to the government. And there was really never, ever a major problem between, you know, the Modocs and the settlers. After that happened, everything changed. No longer were the Modocs free people. I know my family were sent back to Oklahoma Indian Territory as prisoners of war. My great-grandfather was a prisoner of war. Even the women were. And the land itself changed. There was no longer a need for a lake. They began to drain it. It was drained, and that beautiful, beautiful lake shrank.
Some of those carvings on that stone were off from, 30, 40, 50 feet off from the valley floor. They would mark on their timelines of being there. They would mark different things, but a lot of them had to be when the water level was so high that they were in a canoe when they carved some of that stuff out. Those last three are when we crash back up on shore. Boom, boom. Our grandma died when we were real young in the early 70s, 76 or 78 or something. They're part of the life that was told to forget about those songs. Forget about the language. Don't talk about that stuff anymore.
I was in television and I had a talk show and I interviewed my own father. And I asked him, I said, Daddy, how did you feel about the Indian school you were in?
I said, nobody liked to be away from home because they were taken, in the first years of their lives.
In those schools, you were punished if you spoke your language, hair was cut, you were brought into a totally different culture, and you were punished for trying to remember anything from your own tribe. Overall, there was a lot of things that happened that should not have happened, and of course, this was the U.S. government paying for it, and that's another sad thing. But it happened.
Okay, now, where did you learn to speak Modoc?
From my grandmother and my mother when I was about 2 years old. That's the first thing I learned.
And you spoke Modoc in your home then as you were growing up?
Yes, I did.
How old were you when you finally learned to speak English?
7.
And then you moved on to an Indian boarding school. Where was that?
the Indian school was Chemawa, Oregon.
Chemawa. And did you speak Modoc there?
Well, to some of them that wanted to learn, but if we were caught, they didn't want us talking at all.
You weren't encouraged to speak Modoc?
No.
Why do you suppose that was?
Well, they wanted us to forget our language and learn English.
So there's a lot of racism still today that, we have to deal with. I'm not worried about what happened 200 years ago. That doesn't bother me, but it does stay because it's affecting my kids, my grandkids, and I don't like it at all.
Oh, yes. I got this letter in 1990. A bill was passed in Congress, a letter of apology from the president, $20,000 for any person who was imprisoned in World War II camp, and money to spread the history of that period. But most of the people who should have gotten it were long since dead, like my parents and their peers. And then as they saw that, well, we were pretty well behaved and looked like they were not going to be a threat, they said, we really need more soldiers. So they came into the camps and said, you need to volunteer to fight for your country.
Only those evacuees whose statements and whose acts leave no question of their loyalty to the United States are permitted to leave.
And then the infamous so-called loyalty oaths came out. It's a brilliant idea that the U.S. Army had of how to determine whether people were loyal or not. And there were two very important questions in that questionnaire that really interested them more than any of the others. And one was saying that I will serve in the armed forces of the United States at any time that I'm called upon to do so. And the other one was, I will disavow my allegiance to the Emperor of Japan and whatever. Well, you know how that went over. Half of them said, sure, I'll go, anything to get out of this hellhole. And the other half said, hell no, I won't go. So they became the no-nos, and the ones who went in the army or were drafted were yes, yes. My father was a very smart man, and he was a Zen Buddhist. He knew what those questionnaires were for. And he just went along with things. You just accept what's inevitable, make the best of it. So he knew if he answered no to those two questions, probably something bad would happen. So he answered yes to both of those. He's a 69-year-old man saying, yes, I'll serve in the armed forces anytime I'm called upon to do so. It's ridiculous. So we were considered loyal because we said yes, yes. And that's when we left Tule Lake for Heart Mountain, Wyoming. The worst thing that happened is that all the no-nos in the other 9 camps were shifted to Tule Lake. And Tule Lake became a segregation center. And you can imagine how angry and horrible that population became. So when people hear Tule Lake, they hear about that no-no situation and the riots and all that, and that they built a jail. When I lived there, it was a quiet, peaceful place. But because of that questionnaire and the yes, yes, no, no situation, it became a horrible place. It took that 3 years for the government to say, we shouldn't be having these people locked up. There's no reason to keep them locked up. So they opened up the camps, said, you can go home now. I was so excited about leaving the camp And what do you know, when I got home, my classmates that I'd grown up with in the 1st to 4th grade wouldn't speak to me or play with me or have anything to do with me. And at age 12, 13, 14, most important thing in your life is friends. And so I had a really hard time. That was the hardest time of my life. And I think it contributed to me to turn my back on my heritage and try to shrug off my Japanese heritage.
Tell me where we're going, Mitzi.
Oh, we're going to pick up my friend who is 100 years old, going on 101 very soon. She loves to go to the Tuesday afternoon free movie at the senior center. And she gave up driving in her 90s a couple of years ago and actually gave her car for nothing to a friend who had lost her house and everything in the Alameda fire.
And so now I get around by my legs, the bus, and my dear friends like Mitzi. And I give away these tiny boxes on the bus, and of course people love it, and I get great pleasure in giving it away.
Oops, not here.
Missy!
I always have a time because the street goes, cattywampus.
I haven't heard that word for a long time. Cattywampus. Oh, I love that.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Enjoy. Chocolate.
Oh, that's even better.
Oh no.
6.
16.
16. Well, the American Legion Post in Hood River decided they didn't want us back. Hood River News was a weekly newspaper, and every week there would be a full-page paid advertisement. Japs, don't come back. We don't want you. You're not welcome. We'll make life miserable for you, something of that sort. And columns of names that had people sign this petition. And every week, and sitting there in Wyoming, we were going through this with a fine-tooth comb. Everybody we ever knew, just about. I can tell you the names of fingers of my hands of the people who stood up and were friendly to us in the open, were not afraid to say hello to us in public view, helped us when we were struggling to get hardware or mechanic help or something that we were discriminated against. So we couldn't buy hardware in Hood River, and we couldn't get our tractors and cars and trucks fixed when we needed right in the middle of harvest and all that. So these people stepped in and helped us in many ways.
Okay. Hang on. Okay, we're safe there.
Let's see. The other one?
Yeah, keep going until
Okay.
the light is up. There you go. Thanks.
My given name is Mitsuko, and I was always mispronounced as Mitsuko or Mitsuko, and I was sick and tired of being Japanese now because it was bringing too much misery to my life. So I thought, I think I'll just change my name because the kids in town don't know what my name is. And Mitzi Gaynor was very well known in those days, an actress, dancer. And I thought, well, Mitzi's pretty close to my name, Mitsuko, so I think I'll just take on Mitzi. So I went to junior high school and registered as Mitzi and never told anybody. And when my report card came home, my very Zen father looked at the report card and saw Mitzi, and to my delight, he smiled. And he looked at me and he smiled. He didn't ask me any questions. He didn't bring up the subject, nor did I. And I have been Mitzi ever since.
Bye.
Modoc, that's what I am.
Waklas Ichiwa. Moams Niditjawa. How are you, Chiwa? I like you very much.
How do you feel passing your native language on to people of that blood?
Well, it makes me feel proud of myself that I can teach the language.
At the end of the Modoc War, there were 4 Modocs that were hanged, and a couple of them were sent to Alcatraz. And they were buried right near the Fort Klamath itself. But by the time we were living there, there was nothing left. But my mother had a very deep interest in Modoc history, and she said, those graves have got to be someplace here. We started looking for the graves. And what we do, we go someplace that might possibly be it, and we'd all get out and look and look and look. And we did this for a long, long time. And one day, lo and behold, we found it. We moved off of the Klamath Reservation where I was born. I lived there for 5 years, and we moved to Klamath Falls so I could go to school. My parents would pick me up after school. This is hard to even talk about now. When I was in television, I had a cameraman, and we went to that school to interview the principal. And as we were walking down the hallway, all of a sudden, I started shaking. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I slumped against the wall, and I went down to my cameraman. He put it down. He says, "Are you okay?" I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. So we sat there for a while, and pretty soon I said, I think we can go ahead and find this man we're supposed to interview. And I stood up. We started walking down the hallway, and off to the left, there was a door. That was the door to the back parking lot. That's where I had my father pick me up, and my mother picked me up at the front door. Because nobody could see us much in the back, and all the kids were out in the front, and they would have seen. They got to see my mother, not my father. My mother is not a Native person. I decided that if I were going to write, and if I were going to really understand, what the Modoc people were all about, I needed to be where they were, and of course that was the Lava Beds National Monument.
My father was born in a cave, in one of the caves in Lava Bed National Monument in California, about 30 miles from Tule Lake.
During the Modoc War itself.
I was the first and only Modoc Ranger they ever had, and they haven't had one since.
Terrible things that happen, but we have to remember those too, because stepping into the future and redoing these canoes, redoing those songs, we have to remember that it was once illegal to do those things.
Now we laugh. Our hearts are true, our hearts are strong, together we dance.
We're just little people, We're here and we do our ceremonies, and we try to give what we've been given in a good way, share that what needs to be shared. There's more than just you sitting here and the wind blowing on you. There's life all around you. There's all kinds of beautiful things here. We got a nice little wind. The trees are dancing, they're happy, they heard these songs, they're hearing these stories, and they're seeing life go on right here in the best way. And that's where I'm at. You know, I'm just honored to be here, happy to share.
I knew that would not have to be forever. I was able to live through those years and laugh about it and talk about it. That's what you have to do. When you have painful things happen to you, you must not hang on to that. You must make a big effort, get it out of your system, and go forward in a positive way.
My speech was very well understood, but it was uneducated, male, and vulgar. And years later, when I was active in the high school exchange. Hi, girl.
Mitzi, it's wonderful. I have your other book, so I'm going to buy this one. You want to see
I've always been Gabby. I'm like my father. I'm a storyteller. I got this in my stocking this Christmas. This is the Daruma, which is a very famous Japanese figure. I have one in the living room with not this angry face, but has two eyes, one with a dot in it, the other one is blank. And Japanese people keep a Daruma in their house, and when something very happy or fortunate happens, then you paint the dot in the second eye. And he was thought to have meditated so long, he lost his arms and legs. And no matter what you did to knock him down, always came back into an upright position. My son gave me this a while back. He doesn't know that I've painted that dot back in. I think it was because of the situation for Japanese Americans is beginning to change so that the American people understand what happened to us in World War II. And it made me feel happy. I guess that's why I painted it in. We're not there yet, but we're getting there.
It was a great day to swap 4 wheels for 2. With the sun rising over Portland, thousands of cyclists kicked off their annual pilgrimage on roads usually forbidden. That includes Mitzi Loftus.
Oh, I just love it.
Who at 90 years old is riding for a 5th straight year.
So whatever he says, I say, let's go.
You're riding a tandem bike.
Yes, yeah. So I enjoy the scenery and he does all the work.
When a friend asked her to ride, she signed right up. Plus, she says, it's good for her knees.
I think he thought I was game. I think he knew I would do practically anything.
Like a 13-mile ride among strangers, knowing she's far from the only one with her helmet on, ready to go.